I just want to remind you that for many years in right-wing media, in conservative political discourse, one of the primary attacks on Joe Biden, if not the leading attack on Joe Biden and the Democratic Party writ large, is that Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, the DNC are captive to, controlled by Beijing. They're in the pockets of the Chinese Communist Party. They're afraid to confront the Chinese party. They are essentially just a party, an arm of China, similar to the way liberals think of the Republican Party as being an arm of the Kremlin. Conservatives think of Democrats as being an arm of the Chinese government. And here is CNN, House GOP digs in on the China-linked payments to the Biden family members and a new member. This has been the attack on Biden for years, that they are in bed with the Chinese. Quote, "It is unclear what services were provided to obtain this exorbitant amount of money," Republican Oversight Committee Chair James Comer said in a statement. House Oversight Republicans claim that these transactions raise questions about foreign influence over the Biden family, but there is still no conclusive evidence that Joe Biden was involved in his son's business matters, and there is no indication he abused his powers in public office to help his family make money. Here is James Comer talking on May 10th of 2023 about the links between the Biden family and China.
While those funds had to go through an intermediary in what appears to be an attempt to hide the transfers from the Chinese. They also couldn't explain why the Bidens received over $1 million in 16 different wire transfers over a period of 3 months to at least 5 different banks. The president, when confronted with this information, said it wasn't true. Instead of being honest with the American people, President Biden has claimed since the 2020 election that his family has not received money from China. That was a lie in 2020, and he continues to lie to the American people now. The Bidens have received millions of dollars from China. It is inconceivable that the president did not know it. The White House refuses to correct the president's statements, showing the president is now using the federal government to run interference for his families and his own role in these schemes. Now I want to say a few remarks about the developments last week. A week ago, I sent a subpoena to the...
Okay, so that has been the attack on Joe Biden. He is economically tied to the Chinese, just like liberals say Trump was tied to Russia. Here from Politico, just to give you one last sense, from July of 2023, the headline, "Biden's China diplomacy spree hits the Republicans' Great Wall of Scorn. Biden tries to convince China hawks and Beijing that talking about talking is worth it." And here was the Republican attack on Joe Biden. Quote, "Anthony Blinken's outreach to Beijing was, quote, weak and desperate and constituted, quote, pandering to the Chinese Communist Party," Representative Elise Stefanik, Republican of New York, said in a statement last month. Now, let me ask you this. If Joe Biden is captive to the Chinese Communist Party, if he does their bidding, if he is willing to serve their interests for profit, if the Democratic Party depends upon their relationship with Beijing, if the entire political establishment in Washington is tied at the hip to China, which has been one of the primary beliefs of the populist right in the United States, why is it that anyone is now willing to believe that Joe Biden suddenly woke up and joined hands with the entire leadership of the Democratic Party, who has been accused for years of being captive to the Chinese, and then suddenly woke up and decided, oh my God, it's time that we have to purge the United States of the evils of Chinese propaganda and Chinese influence in our country? Ben Shapiro today said it's so nice that finally there's some bipartisan sense going on. Now, let's leave aside the fact that Ben Shapiro's entire foreign policy, almost every plank of it, is supported by bipartisan consensus in Washington. Having the U.S. finance the war in Ukraine, having the U.S. finance the war in Israel, bombing Yemen, bombing targets in Iraq and Syria, encircling China with military bases, and now banning TikTok. Ben Shapiro's idea, like, oh, finally some bipartisanship. Bipartisanship is something that Ben Shapiro finds in almost every one of his foreign policy views. But let's leave that aside. If the Republican Party and the conservative movement really believes that Joe Biden is captive to the Chinese Communist Party, why are they also so sure and convinced that the motive behind Joe Biden's support for this bill and the Democratic Party's support for this bill is they've suddenly decided to get tough with China and to kick China out of the United States? Isn't it much more rational to believe that there's some other motive here that is causing the U.S. security state that has been agitating for years for TikTok to either be banned or to be transferred to control of a company much more like Facebook or Google that they can control much more easily in terms of, quote, content moderation and the other kinds of information that flow over it, so there's no dissent allowed? So there's no more wars where people are free to freely express their opposition the way they have been with the bipartisan support for the war in Israel? Where are all the people who are so concerned about the U.S. security state consolidating control over the internet and the ability of Americans to use social media to express their political views? It seems to all have evaporated simply by a few utterances of the word China that send some people into such frenzies of fear that they're willing to hand over to the government control over the internet, very similar to the way that Europeans and American liberals have done the minute people start uttering the word Russia. At the very least, doesn't a lot of this deserve skepticism, given that the winner of this bill will be either the fact that tens of millions of Americans who now use TikTok will be forced onto Facebook and Google, platforms we know are easily controlled by the U.S. security state if TikTok ends up being banned, or if a American company takes over TikTok. There's reports today that Trump's former Treasury Secretary, the extremely wealthy Seth Mnuchin, is trying to lead a purchase of TikTok, that it ends up in much friendlier hands much friendlier to the U.S. security state, who will be just as malleable when it comes to requests or orders from the CDC and the CIA, the FBI, about what to censor and what not to censor. When you have reporting that is telling you that the real reason this bill is rushing through Congress is not for the stated reason, which is China, but because of bipartisan concern over how freely people are to express their criticisms of Israel, then at the very least you should be extremely concerned about the implications for free speech, which we've all come together to agree is a value that has to be very aggressively safeguarded. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.